Before we begin today's video, if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, if you believe truth should never hide behind power, please take a moment to subscribe. Every share, every comment, every new voice here helps shine a light where silence once ruled. Because what you're about to hear isn't just about a prince or a financier, it's about power, unchecked, unchallenged, and the people left broken in its wake. This is a story of privilege, protection, and the price of silence. A story that begins long before the headlines, and one that even now refuses to end. Welcome to the story of Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein, a friendship that changed the face of the British monarchy. When a prince meets a kingmaker of a very different kind, a man whose wealth, power, and secrecy cast a long shadow over the elite, something unexpected happens. Not simply a scandal, a reckoning, a story of betrayal, exploitation, and the struggle for justice. He was born into privilege. Prince Andrew, second son of Queen Elizabeth II, once a naval officer, a figure of confidence, charm, and duty, a man expected to serve, to represent, to stand for something. Then there was Jeffrey Epstein, a financier, a social chameleon, whose friendships spanned the very top of society. The glittering parties, the private jets, the private islands. At the surface, it looked like success. Beneath it, something far more sinister. When paths cross between royalty and infamy, the boundaries between image and reality begin to blur. The friendship between Andrew and Epstein traces back to the 1990s. Epstein, after all, cultivated access to the powerful. He was introduced into spheres he should not have been in. Andrew invited Epstein's companion, Ghislaine Maxwell, to royal parties. They kept company in London, in New York, in the Bahamas. To many, it seemed an odd pairing. The urbane British prince and the American fixer, financier, whatever you want to call him. To the others, it was a warning because Epstein's world was not built on boardrooms and charities alone. It was built on trafficking, manipulation, and secrecy. Andrew would later claim his ties with Epstein ended in December 2010. Yet, evidence shows they persisted into early 2012. One email from Epstein to Andrew says, "Keep in close touch and we'll play some more soon." So the question, when did association become complicity? And did power shield Prince Andrew for far longer than it should have? By early 2000s, whispers about Epstein's secret life had begun turning into something far darker. Allegations of young women, even minors, being groomed and trafficked across borders were beginning to make headlines. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern, a web of private jets, luxurious mansions, and island retreats where innocence was currency and silence was survival. Among those caught in that web was Virginia Giuffre, then Virginia Roberts, a teenager who would become one of the most prominent voices against Epstein and his circle. She claimed that in 2001, at just 17 years old, she was trafficked by Epstein and Maxwell and forced into sexual acts with several of Epstein's powerful associates, including Prince Andrew. Her words were dismissed by some at first, drowned out by disbelief and the insulation of power. But she never wavered. Her account remained consistent, detailed, and haunting, a story of exploitation that placed a royal figure squarely at the center. Then came the photograph, perhaps one of the most scrutinized images of the century. In it, A young Virginia Jeffrey stands beside Prince Andrew, his arm wrapped casually around her waist, smiling. Behind them, Ghislaine Maxwell watches. That single frame became more than evidence. It became a symbol of access, of complicity, of the invisible cost of privilege. And even as Andrew denied ever meeting her, the image stared back, undeniable, unblinking. Years later, after Epstein's 2008 conviction and his re-emergence into the elite circles, Prince Andrew would again be seen with him, this time in New York in 2010. Epstein had already served time for soliciting a minor. Yet, there they were, walking together through Central Park, captured by photographers. Andrew later claimed he had gone there only to end their friendship. But the optics were devastating. The prince of the realm taking a stroll with a convicted sex offender. For the monarchy, for the British establishment, for every institution built on reputation and restraint, this wasn't just a scandal. It was a slow public unraveling of trust. If a royal could walk beside Epstein so freely, then what else had been tolerated, hidden, or ignored? It wasn't merely about image, it was existential, a question of whether privilege had become protection and whether those sacred mechanisms of duty and decency had already failed. In late 2019, pressure on Duke of York, Prince Andrew's official title, had reached a breaking point. His name was etched across headlines, his silence growing heavier by the day. And then, in a move that would define his downfall, he sat for an interview on the BBC's Newsnight. The idea was simple: to clear the air, to offer answers, to reclaim dignity. But what unfolded was something entirely different, an implosion broadcast to millions. In the interview, Andrew's tone was detached, almost mechanical. He said he couldn't sweat an odd medical claim meant to discredit Jeffrey's account of their first meeting. By his account, on that fateful night, he was not with Epstein and his gang, as Jeffrey had alleged, but was enjoying a family dinner at a Pizza Express in Woking, as if an ordinary meal could erase the gravity of her allegations. And through it all, something crucial was missing: empathy. Not once did he express compassion for the women exploited by his good friend Epstein. Not once did he acknowledge their suffering. The reaction was swift. The interview was labeled a disaster, a train wreck, the end of Prince Andrew as we knew him. Overnight, charities cut ties. Palace aides distanced themselves. Within days of that disaster of an interview, he announced he would step back from the royal duties for the foreseeable future. And just like that, the prince, who had once flown on royal tours and stood beside his mother at state ceremonies, was gone, replaced by a man isolated, defiant, and publicly disgraced. In early 2022, the story reached another turning point. Virginia Jeffrey filed a civil lawsuit in the United States against Prince Andrew, accusing him of sexual abuse and seeking accountability long denied. The palace walls, once impenetrable, seemed to tremble. For months, Andrew's legal team fought to dismiss the case, but as evidence mounted, flight logs, testimonies, photographs, the pressure became unbearable. Then, in February 2022, the announcement came: a settlement. Prince Andrew agreed to pay an undisclosed sum, reportedly in the millions, to Virginia Jeffrey, someone Prince Andrew claimed to have no recollection of ever meeting. In the statement, he did not admit to any guilt, but expressed a vague regret for his association with Epstein and commendation for Jeffrey's courage in speaking out. His statement felt hollow, like he was just making this statement to convince us he was with the victims. It did not feel like contrition. It was a deal, not justice. Without an admission of wrongdoing, without a single day in court, the public was left wondering, what does accountability mean when you can afford to avoid it? Meanwhile, the investigation into the Epstein network continued. Files revealed a labyrinth of shell companies, coded transactions, and names of powerful men who'd flown on his planes, stayed in his homes, enjoyed his generosity, yet few faced any real consequences. It was not closure, it was a pause, a chapter, one written in truth, but in settlement ink. The story was far from over. By October 2025, the scandal resurfaced with renewed force. A trove of correspondence and witness testimonies reignited the public anger, widening the circle of scrutiny once more. Among the most explosive revelations was a report that Prince Andrew, back in 2011, had allegedly asked a public protection officer to dig up information, even dirt, on Virginia Jeffrey. According to emails seen by investigators, Andrew allegedly wrote, "It would also seem she has a criminal record in the United States. I have given her date of birth and social security number for investigation with the on-duty PPO." If true, the message painted a disturbing picture of a royal using state-provided security to target his accuser. The Metropolitan Police confirmed they were actively reviewing the claims. The palace declined to comment. The silence was deafening. At the same time, the monarchy's patience appeared to have run out. Following a private discussion with King Charles, Prince Andrew agreed to relinquish his remaining titles and honors, including the title of Duke of York. This time, it was more than a symbolic act. It was a statement. The monarchy, desperate to preserve its own credibility, was cutting him loose. For the first time in modern royal history, a prince stood stripped of his title, privilege, and protection, his future uncertain, his reputation shattered. And for the survivors, the thousands whose names never made headlines, this moment resonated far beyond one man. It was about whether justice could ever reach the powerful, whether truth could ever penetrate the walls of status and secrecy. Because in the end, this story was never just about a prince. It was about the system that enabled him, the silence that protected him, and the outrage of those who refused to stay quiet. What happens to a young woman trafficked into a world of silence and threat? What happens to the institutions that assume trust, prestige, protection, mean immunity? Virginia Jeffrey's posthumous memoir, Nobody's Girl, published in October 2025, lays bare that fear, the trauma, the longing for truth. She died in April 2025. Her death, a tragic reminder of the cost of this fight. And for the royal institution, a crisis of confidence. For the public, a reckoning of power and privilege, and for society, a harsh lesson in what happens when secrets are shielded and the voice of the vulnerable are dismissed. The question is no longer just what did he do, but what allowed it. Calls have grown louder in Parliament, among public commenters, among victims, for full accountability, for transparency, for structural change. Because, as I said before, the story isn't only about one man, one settlement, one title. It's about a system. And when that system fails, people die. Where do we go from here? As the investigation deepens, as titles fall away, as reputations stumble, there remains the question of justice. Criminal justice, yes, but beyond that, moral justice, institutional reform, a culture that refuses to look away. For Prince Andrew, the damage is existential. For the monarchy, the damage is reputational. For victims, the damage is personal and profound. But perhaps there is a hope that survivors are heard and secrets are exposed, that power is held to account. And so we close this chapter, not because the story is finished, but because this moment demands reflection. A royal son, once elevated by heritage and duty, a financier, once trusted by the elite, a network built in shadows, and the women whose lives were changed forever. What we witnessed was the fracture of myth, the unraveling of privilege, the push of justice into daylight. If nothing else, let this be a reminder: no one is above scrutiny, no institution beyond reform, and every voice matters. Because if we turn our backs now, then all we see in the mirrors is what happens when the powerful escape accountability and the vulnerable remain invisible. Thank you for listening. Please do like, share, and subscribe. Stay safe. I'll see you in the next one.